Chinese President Xi Jinping's top economic advisor is making the rounds in Washington. Vice Premier Liu He is set to meet with President Trump at the White House today. That's according to Larry Kudlow. The National Economic Council director went on to describe the trade talks as difficult and tamped down reporting of rifts on the president's trade team between Beijing hardliners and those more eager for a deal. We welcome now Congressman Tom Reed, Republican of New York, who sits on the House Ways and Means Trade Policy Subcommittee. Congressman, great to have you back. Thank you so much for your time. You've met with Vice Premier Liu He. What was your key takeaway? Are they here to make a deal?
They are definitely, I think, here to engage in conversation and negotiations, and I took that as a positive sign. But there's a lot of complicated issues between, obviously, the United States and China in the present day. And so this is the beginning of those conversations, and I just appreciate the fact that there was an openness and a willingness to engage.
Which ones, in your views, are the key hurdles right now?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, just the overall unfair practices that historically have been deployed by China. Things like the overcapacity issues on steel and aluminum issues, as well as the whole issue of intellectual property in particular, is something I'm very sensitive to, and many members are sensitive to, as well as all Americans, when it just comes to that unfair playing field that we do not have with the China trade relationship, in my opinion.
So, Congressman, is this a matter of dollars and cents, or is this a matter of national security? Because we hear both things. On the one hand, we hear it's all about the trade deficit. On the other hand, we have a situation like ZTE, where we thought that there was a technology issue that had to do with national security. Which is it?
It's both. I don't believe you can say it's one or the other. I think they're both in play, and they're both equally important when you talk about not just dollars and cents, but national security. They go hand in hand. And so I see that there's an opportunity to resolve these. And for the first time ever, I see true engagement occurring. And that is because of the disruptive policies coming out of the administration, in my opinion.
Is there a trade-off between the two? And do you favor what the president did with ZTE? Because that was thought to be really something very serious. They had violated sanctions with respect to Iran and North Korea.
And you have some serious national security concerns there with ZTE, as we all know. But, you know, you have to, it's not a trade-off per se. It's just getting the right balance between the two. And I think that's the tone that we sent with a message yesterday of, we're glad they're here, we're glad to engage, but they're going to be tough negotiations, and this is just the beginning. This is a longer process.
What do you make of President Trump's concerns over jobs in China?
I think, you know, obviously, it's recognizing the nature of the negotiations, the different positions that are at the table. And I think the president's going to do very well in regards to putting this forward and getting American interests taken into consideration at the top level that historically may not have been at the same level in the negotiations.
And at the same time, we're seeing Congress trying to tighten those investment curbs from Chinese companies, putting them into a list of hostile nations. What do you think of those efforts and the message that that sends to China?
I think it sends the right message, is that, you know, we're going to look for our allies. We're going to get our coalition together as we engage in these negotiations with this big elephant in the room, i.e. China. And so this is just another step in that process. And I think the more that we unite the table with us and our allies, the stronger we're going to be in these negotiations.
Congressman, as these negotiations go on in Washington, even as we speak, do you have a clear idea of who's leading it from the U.S. side? Ultimately, of course, the President of the United States. But whom is he deputized? Because we are hearing reports of conflicts between, for example, Mr. Navarro and the Secretary of the Treasury.
I think the team as well understood who they are. I mean, you got the Treasury Secretary, you got the Commerce Secretary, as well as Peter Navarro there at the table. And I think what you're seeing in these public reports that are out there is just kind of part of the high-pressure stakes that we're involved with here. But at the end of the day, we're unified. That was the message I tried to deliver yesterday in the conversation with the Vice Premier, is Democrats, Republicans recognize unfair trade practices is something that's going to unite us together to stand with the American worker, the American people. And the message of unity, I think, is going to come through loud and clear, even though you may have these internal squabbles at different times during these high-pressure situations.
Congressman, give us your sense of the timeline. Do you believe that we will have at least some clarity, if not an ultimate deal, some clarity about where this is headed before Mr. Liu He returns to Beijing?
No, I think this is going to be a longer process. This is the opening exchange. We were in China with our trade representatives going over a few weeks back. This is a continuation of that dialogue, and this is just the beginning. So I think we're just going to have to continue to engage and keep an eye on this as we go forward.
And Congressman, the deadline to notify Congress on NAFTA, the Speaker Ryan proposed, is today. We're not expecting anything at this moment. How much does it affect the chances of getting a new deal approved by Congress this year?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's to me, that's a real deadline. I mean, there is a little bit of an openness there, but May 17th truly is the deadline. So if we don't have something tonight, I think we're going to just continue to negotiate, and that pushes the actual vote potentially into the next year.
And what happens to the U.S. aluminum and steel tariffs are expected to take effect in 2 weeks against Canada and Mexico?
Well, that's all part of where we're at with the negotiations. They're real, and that's forcing the negotiation table to, in my opinion, come to conclusions on these issues. And what they have a backstop not only on the May 17th deadline, but the imposition of these tariffs and building up that pressure, I think, is good. It's going to force, hopefully, the outcome that we want, which is an agreement that is updated NAFTA and put American interests at equal footing with the other partners in Canada and Mexico.